Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched The Thomas Crown Affair. This time, the one from 1999. Now, if you're a frequent, long-time watcher, hopefully you'll already have seen my video from last week about the original 1968 version of this film. As I mentioned then, I was going to watch this one as well. And allegedly there's another either remake or sequel stuck in development hell somewhere, but it's been years anyway, so that's not a thing. Anyway, my point is that I watched the 1999 remake this week with Pierce Brosnan in the role of Thomas Crown, and then Rene Russo as his sort of counterpart, foil, etc. It also majorly features Dennis Leary, which is weird. Not that he doesn't fit the role, it's Dennis Leary, and Dennis Leary makes me leery. I know that's a terrible play on words, but it's true. He's a weird guy. And he really can only do the one thing as an actor. So, I don't know. He's fine. I don't really know why they elevated his role in the film so much from the first one, but we're going to get into the differences and similarities in due time. So the overall film is actually surprisingly, it's a surprisingly close remake in a lot of respects, and it is revamped pretty dramatically in some others. However, they are mostly for, I think, aesthetic and modernization purposes more than anything else. And so the overall story being told varies very little. It is interesting to see this brought into a modern context. They didn't try and remake a period piece from the 60s or something like that. This is set in the 90s, and it is very 90s. Unfortunately, that has some other side effects, both due to the contemporary cinema at the time, and also who Pierce Brosnan was as an actor. Hold on, I have to double check this before I get it wrong. I believe he had already done all or most of the Bond films that he was going to do. Hold on. 95 to 2002. Okay, so he was in the middle of it, actually. Anyway, so everybody knew who Pierce Brosnan was. He was Bond at the time. And that influences a number of different things about the film. I think most dramatically, it characterizes him as more of it's less of the sort of 60s era playboy, which doesn't play as well in a modern setting for a variety of reasons. And instead, they make Thomas Crown a entrepreneur, art dealer, business magnate, something. He's got all these things going on. He's insanely wealthy, far more wealthy than the character was in the original film. And the character in the original film was a $4 million and then a $2 million heist, which in modern money is a lot, but not nearly the amount implied to be going on in this film. So Pierce Brosnan in the role, I think, fits pretty well, and Rene Russo as well, who we've seen in Velvet Buzzsaw. Although this is, what, like 17 years earlier or something like that. She was already. You'll have to excuse me. This is Hollywood standards talking. She was already a little bit older. I think she was probably maybe in her 30s at the time. But that's a little old for a leading woman in Hollywood, unfortunately. That said, as a side note, this movie has a shocking amount of nudity in it. It's not really played in a sexy way. It's just sort of nonchalant, and I think that's okay. It's not like it's not, the sort of nasty, like, male gaze, look at this sexy woman kind of thing. With the exception of her introduction, actually, I forgot about that. The very first shot of her is really horrendous, and I don't know if it's a joke or not. If you watch this film, let me know what you think about that one. But it is nice to, well, it's nice to see. I mean, I don't even know what the appropriate terminology is to use here, because by Hollywood standards, she would be a mature woman or something like that, something horrific and very demeaning. But like, it's nice to see somebody who doesn't have to be, like, young, model hot kind of thing in a leading role. Interestingly, Faye Dunaway is also in this film, returns for this film as Thomas Crown's therapist, which I think is a wonderful addition to the film. It's incredibly smart as a way to explore the sort of underlying psychology of him and the relationship between some of him and some of the other characters, and even as like a sort of audience proxy to critique his behavior. The film itself, the very first scene in the film is him having a conversation, and all of these things that I've already talked about sort of are fed to you very quickly, but nice and subtly as well, to give you more of this idea of who he is. Whereas the original film is sort of like, he's in business, he's got some money, he's a little bit smarmy because the business deal, he sort of, cuts it off with a curt remark, that sort of thing. But having it instead be like him in therapy, which implies certain things on its own in terms of his own self-awareness and those sorts of things. But like the things that he says and how he, throughout the film, talks about his work and his relationship with women. I mean, I think the first thing in the film is like, he says sort of some kind of unpleasant, unpleasant things about his viewpoints on women. And it is very informative in a much more firm manner compared to how I was complaining about the last film, giving you more of a sense that this isn't really a good guy. You're not really rooting for this guy. And you could go one way or the other on whether you want that characterized or not. I still don't think it, pushes you firmly one way or the other. You still go through this film sort of flip-flopping between how you feel about various people. But it's an interesting addition. I wish they had used it a little bit more effectively, but the therapy edition is great. And it's just, kind of fun to see Faye Dunaway back in the sequel. I kind of like that stuff. So one of the some of the other major changes, there are a lot of things that are very, very similar, to the point of using chunks of the original script, as far as I can tell, completely verbatim. And what's fascinating about that is there are some substantial changes that have to be made because of some other underlying narrative choices that they made. So if you haven't watched the original film already, sorry. In the first one, Thomas Crown arranges for bank robberies. In this one, he arranges for art theft. And that's a pretty substantial change, not in terms of the overall structure and the storytelling of sort of this relationship between an insurance investigator and the purported thief, but like that all stays the same, but so many of the elements that sort of circle around it, the nuances of the investigation that goes on, all of that has to be changed to fit with it. And I think it works really well. In fact, I think overall that's a much more interesting premise. The idea of, rather than like this, playboy arranging for other people to steal money out of a bank. It's not like, it doesn't give you a really good idea of why he wants to do that in the first film. He doesn't have some grand scheme for it. It's really just about the thrill of it, but he's also not really involved, so it doesn't quite make sense. Whereas there's something about it being a tangible art piece that is it's much more personal. It's much more about a personal relationship to the art and a personal involvement in the elements that go into it. That said, I'm going to come back to this later, but I do not like what they did with the heist for a whole bunch of reasons, including Thomas's personal involvement in it. One of the things that's so fascinating and really good about that first film, and the first couple of scenes of that first film, is it's really well organized. Even if it's not necessarily as narratively compelling as to why he wants to do it, it gives you much more of a sense of him as a mastermind rather than a mastermind, and to some extent a thrill seeker, but rather than somebody who's like sort of, for want of a better phrase, a wannabe James Bond. Like he I mean, minor spoilers in the first scene, he gets directly involved. He's the one who steals the painting. So, like, it's a very different thing all of a sudden. It's a kind of a minor change, but it's also a very major one. Because rather than sort of being above it all, he's so directly involved in it, it almost seems silly. The spectacle of the whole thing seems absurd. And it's sort of reflective of Bond. It's sort of reflective of these other, like, sort of corporate greed films, things like The Game or something like that. There's all these things you could relate it to that I don't really think fit the rest of the narrative. But as long as we're talking about narrative, we have to talk about all the things they didn't change that are still bad. The overall arc of the film is mostly about the development of this relationship between Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo. The problem is, once again, it's really not that compelling or interesting. Both of them are kind of boring and flat and semi-one-dimensional. They don't have a huge amount of chemistry, but again, part of that is just sort of, not having a huge amount of time. I don't even want to say they don't have time on screen together. It's just not utilized well. It's still a lot of like montages of fancy places and expensive things and those sort of things. And what's much more compelling in a story like this is the potential development of like a really a relationship with a really strong dichotomy that I wanted in the first film, the original film, and I want in this one as well. The development of an adversarial relationship that also has potentially a romantic element to it. You know, just watching first Faye Dunaway and then Rene Russo just sort of melt into falling for him with not a lot of apparent reason. Like, in neither film do I get the sense that he did a great job wooing her and making her interested, or even being like particularly compelling on his own, other than being sort of a rich, wealthy, or a wealthy, self-assured, quote, a big air quotes, desirable man. Like, he's not interesting. And especially when there's this aspect of, you know, it being directly antithetical to her job. Like, yes, it is, it is a story in part about a woman utilizing her sexuality and her sensuality and all these other things to try to subdue the guy into like giving something up. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it seems like rather than her sort of melting into being his romantic interest, there ought to be a buildup of that adversarial relationship. When she goes back and she has things to show, she feels reassured that her job is going right, but she also is, you know, sort of starting to find him charming. Or she's stymied and like one of her plans is stopped or whatever else, and she gets frustrated with him and wants to like become like realizes that she's getting too unprofessional about it or something like that, and falls back. And that sort of interplay could be really dynamic and interesting and have a lot of really high highs and really low lows in ways that would be compelling to watch. But mostly it's a couple of like spectacle scenes in very 90s ways, by the way. Like things that they don't look terrible or anything. They're just like sort of cheesy thriller / spy stuff that only kind of worked in the 90s and has aged pretty poorly, at least to me. Like it's charming in a cheesy old kind of way, but it's not, it doesn't work as a serious cinematic choice anymore. So aside from like a couple of these scenes that I think are supposed to be like sort of ooh and ah type of things, like there's not a lot that ends up happening. There's a bit more. There's a bit more flash and awe than there is in the first film, but again, nothing that really compels me towards the characters or the overall arc of the narrative, or again, anything more than kind of spectacle about it. The way the film resolves is also drastically changed. It sort of has to be, by virtue of, you know, being painting instead of money. But again, that feels like spectacle, and you're sort of deciding who to cheer for at that point. And it's, again, like it's sort of amusing to watch, but it's not very compelling. So I don't know about that. And then the very final scene as well is dramatically different, in a way that, I mean, it's honestly, it's six of one, half dozen the other. I think the ending of the original film is bad. I think the ending of this film is bad. It's trite, to say the least. So yeah, I mean, it's just sort of overall kind of disappointing. The other thing is that cinematically, this is a much less interesting film to watch. For all my ups and downs on the original, there was an artistic vision going on there sometimes, and sometimes there was some really great stuff. This is shot just like, it's very generic. It feels like a generic 90s or 2000s sort of comedy, drama, thriller, action, romance, whatever the scene calls for. The cinematic language is absolutely consistent with the norms of the time. I can't think of anything basically throughout the whole film that is in any way interesting cinematically. And that's in an already, sort of disappointing film. That not having anything interesting there is a bummer. And there's opportunities for it too, especially when you're doing spectacle scenes, not taking the chance sometimes to do some unique camera work is a shame. But I also imagine there was probably a lot more, corporate meddling in this one than there was in the original film. What a difference, 41 years makes. Yeah. Again, on that same sort of vein, like the style is very dull. It's not even as interesting as the first film. And maybe that's because I'm already very, no, I'm not even going to give it that credit. I was going to say maybe it's because I'm familiar with 90s fashion, and I'm not really that nearly as familiar with 60s fashion. But I know enough about both that, like, some of the stuff they're wearing in the original film is much more interesting, even if you did know that, know the clothes of the time. Even if you did know them better, it's still more interesting to look at. And yeah, the sets are about the same. Like, it's a lot of, okay, this is a set. I guess it's filled with stuff. It's fine, I guess. Just not doing anything for me overall. So yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. Thankfully, it doesn't take a huge amount of time. It's just under 2 hours by a little bit. I don't know that I'd necessarily recommend it to anybody, but it's not like terrible. It's entertaining enough. I'm saying this now because I'm gonna, right after this, I'm gonna get into a full-on spoiler section. But yeah, it's I don't know. I was hoping for a little bit more pizzazz, either like more serious or more cheesy, more something. It just sort of ultimately kind of petered out for me. I'm not mad about any particular aspect of it. It's just kind of, So anyway, from here on out, I'm going to go into full spoiler mode because I want to talk about the differences in the first scene a little bit more deeply. And maybe I'll meander off somewhere else as well in terms of spoilers. Probably I'll talk about the end as well. So if you haven't watched the film yet and you do want to watch it, fair warning, spoilers start here. Okay, so I desperately do not like the heist scene at the beginning of the film. For a whole bunch of reasons. The reason why I like the one in the original film so much is that it is compelling because it's been set, the framework, how it's been set up. We see the, like, one guy get recruited anonymously. we get the extrapolation, then we get the execution, and it's all in sync. It's like it's got all the compelling aspects of another heist film, and it's right at the beginning, and it really hooks you in really well. It's like, okay, this is kind of suspicious. I have a thought of how this is going and who's set it up and how, and watching these guys execute this, even though they don't know each other, is like a fascinating twist. It's not totally unique, but it's something. And seeing the whole plan come together and then having it capped off by Thomas going and retrieving the money, and sort of being spooked at that point, really as a full beginning to end there, really encapsulates. It's a great cinematic work in and of itself, kind of. Excuse me for a moment. I will probably forget to edit that out. So why the new version of the scene doesn't work by comparison is because, for one, it's spectacle. Like it's bad right off the bat in my book because they literally ship in a Trojan horse, and like I get it, it's a joke, but it's not a good one. Again, this is the lampshading issue, where you can put a lampshade on something, but that doesn't make it okay. And so a bunch of guys sealed inside a hollow horse artifact thing in scuba gear is so absurd. And it's not cheesy absurd, it's just bad. It seems like somebody thought they had a smart idea and it wasn't. And then it's like these like couple of Romanian guys who all like it's not even really a good plan. Like they seem bizarrely competent for how bad of a plan it actually is, how many ways it could go wrong. And then to cap off the whole bad thing, it's all a diversion. So Thomas can go in and steal the painting he actually wanted, which he's been there for a while staring at another painting, and why he would do that in the first place, to like make himself suspicious. Like the whole hook in this film, the hook in the first film is also bad, where they don't really explain their logic of how they reached some of their conclusions. But in this case, it's like, okay, you're always there because you love this one painting that happens to be in the same room, or so you tell the like security guard / docent / whatever. But then you set it all up and you have some high tech titanium mesh or titanium frame briefcase to hold open the security gate, and then you're doing rolls, and you've got like it's very Bond, and it's dumb. It's not. I don't believe you. Like it tries to convince you later when he's doing stuff like, instead of polo in the first film, he's doing catamaran racing, and he also has his glider, and so clearly like that's supposed to tell us, oh, he's a thrill seeker. But that's different. There's thrill seeking, and then there's like, oh, I had a custom built high tech heater / brief, like painting moving briefcase designed just for this one heist that I've been planning for who knows how long. And it's almost like it almost sort of undoes the idea of him wanting to take a risk, because it's so calculated and he's so smooth about it, as if he's some sort of secret agent. There's no, like, the thing that makes a character compelling, and what sort of makes Thomas compelling in the end of the heist in the first movie, is because he hears the bell and he gets freaked out, and you're like, oh, this guy's still a human. He's like very cocky about this, and then he like goes home and has this both arrogant but also kind of nervous laughter, and you go, oh, this guy is still a human being with who's not 100% who he pretends to be all the time, versus Pierce Brosnan's version, which is just like, oh yeah, I've got the briefcase in the right place. Nobody moved it. It's totally not going to go wrong. It's all magical. It's all very convenient because it's basically a Bond film for those 15 minutes. And then there's the whole investigation with like these foreign guys and the helicopter and all this thing that just gets waved away after the fact anyway. So why even include it for any other reason than the spectacle? And the answer is, of course, they're not. It's just there for the spectacle of the thing. Because they could easily have had him heist the place himself without that. If he is so competent to execute that, why not like make him just as competent but also more compelling and interesting if he's trying to do the heist himself? I still wouldn't agree with that choice, but it would be better than this. So ultimately, Pierce Brosnan sort of is a terrible choice for this because he was Bond. And I think I would think that even if he wasn't Bond, because he's still weirdly competent at this heisting thing. But it just really doesn't work. As I was talking about before, like the overall arc of the film and Rene Russo's character falling in love with him, like, again, none of the things that you see him do are really compelling. Also, I've never watched the 50 Shades of Grey movies, but I am aware that there is a scene in one of the movies. I don't know if it's in the book. Maybe it's in the book too. And maybe this is a whole sequence of influences. But that Christian Grey flies a glider in that with what's her name. And so all I can think is, wait, have we followed a line here from the original Thomas Crown Affair to this Thomas Crown Affair to either the movie or the book being influenced? I think I believe that the writer was really exacting that the movies had to be very, very close to the book. So I assume it's probably in the book too. So then somebody wrote what's her name? Stephanie Meyer wrote the fucking Twilight books, and then they wrote a fanfic of that included the glider scene from the Thomas Crown. I'm probably reading too much into this. It's just these connections make me slightly crazy. Not that lots of other things don't as well. Anyway, it's weird. None of those scenes are compelling or interesting. He's not that charming other than just being sort of kind of handsome Pierce Brosnan, who, again, even at the time was sort of an older guy in Hollywood, not, the young leading man for sure. And that wouldn't have necessarily been appropriate for this film anyway, but like Steve McQueen looks younger in the original one than Pierce Brosnan does here. And it's apples and oranges. They look very different from one another, but it's a different kind of overall feeling. Again, from the characterization, what little of it there is, to the actor who was chosen, to what other roles those actors had played prior, and who they were in Hollywood at that time. It's all interesting, but it's like Pierce Brosnan is not. I don't know. I guess it works. It works together. I just don't particularly like it. The ending of the film as well, the unheist, has so many holes in it, which is just... it just makes no sense on a whole variety of levels, including, like, most egregiously, this idea that the painting had been there all along, painted over by this contrivance, this being the daughter of a forger who Thomas Crown then took under his wing, and became his, like, goddaughter or something like that, and that she painted over it, and that, the whole plan was that when they mounted it to the wall, which, fuck's sake, they're not, the shutters are there to protect the paintings. The curators of the museum are not going to hang up the loner painting without checking that the frame will get covered by the shutters. So the idea that oh no, it's not that, isn't it? It's I forgot. It's even stupider because they just shoved pencils in the rail, even though the initial shot that precedes that makes it look as though it's not the pencil stopping it, it's the frame of the painting. Either way, it doesn't matter. The whole thing is stupid because they then drench the whole thing in water, which I am 95% sure they wouldn't do in a real museum. I should ask. I actually have a friend who's a museum curator, so I should ask them about it. But I don't think they would do that. I am 95% sure that fire suppression systems in art museums are they're probably not halon, but they're probably, I can't imagine that most of them are fucking sprinklers. Because even if you have the shutters to stop the splash, you're still massively raising the humidity in that room. It's going to have a horrible effect on all of those paintings. It's like everything about that with my very minimal knowledge says that doesn't work. Not to mention they're fucking uncovering the water paint. The paint washes off. It's still $100 million oil painting. And yes, it's oils, but oil paints aren't like, it's not like it's magically waterproof and will have no effects when you drench it in water. That painting is still going to probably, at the very least, I would imagine, have to be taken off, unmounted. The canvas is going to have to be unmounted from the frame and remounted, which is a whole ordeal because it's soaked with water. Not to mention, there's going to be surface damage because of both the water and the other painting that was done on top of it. Oil paints in particular, well, I'm actually not sure. I'm pretty sure it's an oil painting. But like nothing is completely permanent, but especially not oil paints, which notoriously can take literally hundreds of years to dry. Like they're basically in a malleable form forever, and they only get slightly drier with time. So yes, them drenching that painting and then they're just like, oh, I guess it was here the whole time, is so bad. Everybody should be pissed off. It doesn't work for me. And then the final nail in the coffin of this film is the very ending, whereas the first film ends with Thomas escaping, which is kind of, I mean, it's very shitty and not really compelling, but it seems tonally appropriate because throughout that film, he has more of a sort of aloof personality about the whole thing. You know, he's putting up a front, or he genuinely doesn't really care, and it's still a game of cat and mouse to him, and he kind of doesn't have real feelings for her. Whereas in this one, like, they try and remind you that or convince you one way or the other that the feelings are actually real between them. And I don't think that it might have the possibility that choice could be more compelling, but in this case, it actually isn't. And so it comes off more both sappy and sort of nasty and cold-hearted as well, that Pierce Brosnan yanks her around the whole film, and then at the end it has like this semi-happy thing where she's completely distraught and she's had all these other reasons that haven't been well explained as to why she's upset, and then they're on the plane together and they're presumably happily ever after, and the whole thing is silly and like it doesn't end. It's not heartwarming when the couple gets together. It's just sort of like, really really, this is I don't this is still a weird adversarial relationship that I don't think is healthy in any way. I don't know. I have lots of yucky feelings about lots of romance films. So maybe I'm the wrong person to ask about this, but it doesn't seem compelling or healthy to me. So that change. I mean, it's as I said earlier in the non-spoiler section, it's kind of six of one, half dozen of the other. But I don't think it's that interesting a choice. It doesn't really add anything to the narrative. It doesn't conclude this sort of idea of exploring entrepreneurial greed in the 90s or any of these other things that it could be addressing. It doesn't have like a compelling cat and mouse like something like Catch Me with You If You Can. There's so many things this film could be, and it manages to execute on none of them. I don't know. If you've made it through this whole video at this point, probably you've watched it. Maybe you've watched it. Maybe you're aware of it in a secondary sense. Let me know your thoughts. I'm totally curious what other people think about this. I just don't. I don't find it that charming. Both of these films, this one and the original, were quite well received, generally speaking. So I just don't see it, I guess. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you for something different next time.